Welcome to Woven in the Body, a podcast dedicated to unlocking the stories held within our bodies and awakening a new paradigm of consciousness. I'm your host, Christianna Deichmann, a therapist, spiritualist, mother, wife, and an Aries passionate about shifting humanity's perception of who we truly are and what we're capable of achieving. We provide mentorship for professionals in the fields of pre- and perinatal psychology, coaching, and the somatic healing arts. To explore the full range of our offerings, including classes, retreats, and events, visit us at www.thefloweroflifefoundation.com. Don't miss out on our upcoming events and bonus content. Sign up for our newsletter on our website. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
So welcome Ovi, and welcome to Woven in the Body, unlocking the stories that shape us. I'm Christianna Deichmann. I'm with Ovi Tappe. We're on the screen here, but we're both in Charlottesville, Virginia, on the East Coast of the United States. And Ovi's joining me as an apprentice of the Flower of Life Foundation. She is a seeker, a healer, and has traveled the world looking for the deeper mysteries of life to discover who she is and what she wants to do in this world to make a difference. So I'm super thrilled that you're helping me with this podcast and making it, manifesting it. And you're going to be interviewing me today just so we get a little idea of what woven in the body is and what the parent organization behind the podcast, the Flower of Life Foundation, is all about. So, Ovi, thank you for joining me. Excited to be here. What do you know, or how did you meet me? Maybe we should start there.
I'm equally as excited, and just can't wait to dive into all of this work. And I am so thankful that we met. We met through a referral. So I was working with someone in Colorado. I was working with a therapist there, and I was looking for some more energetic healing work. What was amazing is it really opened the door. Our work together is like really opened the door to exploring and really weaving together the metaphysical realm and the ritual work with the therapeutic world and the therapeutic and psychosomatic therapy that we've been exploring. And it's just been so empowering and beautiful to be reawakening these lost, I would say, pieces of our what we're sort of born to really live out and embody in this lifetime, and like that lost art of initiation and education. So I'm so excited to be here and to be receiving all of this and to be on this journey with you. So, what can you share about what inspired you to start this podcast? Inspired you to start Woven in the Body, and what can listeners really expect from this podcast?
Yes. Okay, that's a great question. So, woven in the body is really a natural outgrowth of my own awakening journey. This journey really started a decade ago. And if the more I explore my own story, the stories of my family, my clients, and the ancestral threads that shape me and shape us as humans, the more I realize how vital this wisdom is for the world and how this knowledge isn't outside of us. It's encoded inside of us. So we've all heard from sages and wisdom keepers that joy and healing are already within our reach. But the question is, how do you actually access it, right? How do you unlock that? How do we heal while balancing the weight of our lives right now? Because if you look around, it's just crazy. It's like, it's a lot to do in one day. Our bodies hold a blueprint. And our big thing at the Flower of Life Foundation is that it all starts with your birth, your story, your own personal narrative. And if you can uncover elements of that, you're really going to the root of how your nervous system, how your psyche literally formed. And then you're opening the doorway or a portal really to your soul. Like where you came from before you came to this world. Like, what is that? That is definitely a big question for a lot of people that they really don't start to address until usually in their 30s, 40s, something like that. And I really would love this to be integrated into the education that we provide our children. And it's really cool because science is finally catching up to what ancient traditions have long known. Our hearts and our guts send more information to the brain than the brain sends in return. But yet we spend most of our day here in this thing. And a lot of people have just cut themselves off from their bodies and from their gut, and which is their intuition. They're programmed. And neuroscientists that are famous now, like Bruce Lipton, or the talk hosts, Joe Dispenza, tell us that by the time we're 35, 95% of our daily actions are automatic. They're habitual. We don't even think about them. And that how they're habitual is that it's because it's part of our subconscious mind. And it's like an airplane on autopilot, right? With only a fraction of our experiences being truly self-directed. No, so this is where people feel stuck. And they're like, is this all there is? Or they get really down and out about the mundane and the routine because they're not creating. They're just like, they're asleep, essentially. And everybody has to go through this awakening process. The Flower of Life Foundation is an organization that's dedicated to education and services around the evolving consciousness of birth, because we feel like that's a key that unlocks everything for people. When they uncover more about their birth and their life in the womb, they uncover their subconscious mind. And then that whole terrain is so rich with material to deeply transform your nervous system, your habits, your behavior. And then when you do that, you're really unlocking your soul. I mentioned that earlier. And then you can weave that knowledge in. Some people call it your higher self, your spirit guides. But once you're in connection with, that's when you're truly rocking. When you're in the flow, when you can access joy and you're resilient and you feel like every day you're being born again, because you are essentially, you're creating. You're self-creating yourself every day. And it's exciting and it's new. And it's not this same old over and over again. Hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
So fascinating. And you mentioned that our earliest experiences shape how we live and how we love. Why is this an important conversation to have now?
Well, our birth stories are the missing link. And when we can understand more of what went into shaping us, we have this wider expansion in our field. We understand that our emotions, our needs are beyond our physical. We've gone through generations of repression of emotions. So we're just stories that are constantly unfolding within an energetic field of information. And if we can turn within instead of that automatic turn without and go, asking somebody to tell us what's wrong with us, that would shift a great deal.
So,
Yes.
yeah, and the Flower of Life Foundation, how does that fit into this work? Um, like what role does it play in educating and supporting people on their journey?
Well, the Flower of Life Foundation is really the action arm of this work. The therapeutic bridge that helps people move from simply listening to this wisdom, like on this podcast, right, to experiencing it in their own lives. So if there's something you hear on this podcast and you're like, wow, I want to tap into my birth. Like, how do you even do that? How do you access the memories of your birth when it happened before you could even before you could even talk, right? Is very pre-verbal. So this Flower of Life Foundation is a space where anyone can come, no matter how old, whether you're a parent and you have a child and you want help with your child or help with yourself, or you're an individual, you're 100 years old, doesn't matter. You can come find guidance, support, and a trained practitioner to walk you through these earliest terrains of your existence and learn more about how energy comes into form, like how your energy, your soul, shaped itself. And really, like the wave analogy, how you formed the wave, right? How you, because that's what coming into this life is. It's expression, right? It's gestures, it's movement. And it's your journey of embodiment from spirit into form. So that's the first thing. And we offer so many, there's a variety, a large menu of services that we offer, which is immersive retreats where you go, you leave, you go on a journey, and that going to the retreat there's a pattern that unfolds that's very indicative of your life, right? And what your earliest experiences are. And we teach you how to become aware of what it was that happened to you on your way to this retreat. And in the retreats, you explore with a group these hidden stories of your time in the womb and your birth, all the way to outside of retreats. We have classes for parents who are navigating like total like real life difficulties, like their child doesn't sleep, are they're having emotional regulation issues, and the parents feeling out of control, are angry, or just exhausted. And so we service that element, and we uh, we're not just working with psychology or spirituality in isolation. I should say we weave together a modern toolbox that includes science, metaphysics, shamanism, ceremony, cranial sacral therapy, massage, rolfing. I mean, there's a large array of practices that we integrate. I say that are transdisciplinary, I think. Um, so, but beyond the offerings at the Flower of Life, we're also the name itself, right? What we put into this organization it's literally a different frequency of operating. It's not built on a rigid patriarchal model, or let's say a recipe that's followed because we went to a training and we're certified in cranial sacral therapy, for instance, or we're certified in psychology. We don't adhere to that at all. Everything that we do is organic, intuitive, and dynamic. It's very present moment emergence. So, you had a friend of yours call me today, and they're like, "What is it that you do?" And it's like, "Well, what is it that you're looking for, right? What is your intention? What do you want to know about yourself, or what's kind of a challenge right now?" And then each person that comes, they have a very personal narrative. And the work that I do with one person may be completely opposite of what I do with another person. And it unfolds literally based off of the person's intention, and we hold space for it. It's very right and left brain, like integrated, and we use a lot of the field. We tap into the actual framework, like this space between you and I has information, and we tap into that. And I think that's where we're really different than most therapeutic approaches.
So cool. And okay, I'd like to circle back to embodiment, which is really what you're talking about when you
Yeah.
this work. And it's a word that we hear it pretty often, but what does it actually mean to be fully present in our bodies?
Okay. Well, it's interesting because you can even see like something that's happening to me on the screen, right? And for those who may just be listening and they're not looking at they're not on our YouTube channel or whatever, you're just listening to the audio of this. I have a really bright red neck right now. And right at the base of it, there's like this white strip. Can you see that, Ovi? So this is my cord, my umbilical cord. It nearly choked me to death when I was coming into the world, and I was a precipitous birth. And I was born in like 4.5 hours. And I was the first child. There was a lot of back labor. And I'm an Aries, right? So I have a lot of fire energy. And I had a huge sympathetic reaction in my birth, like a huge histamine explosion when I was cut off from oxygen because my cord got so tight around my neck. And this is common actually with babies. But this imprint is something that I carry. And when I do public speaking, for instance, my heart, like 10 minutes before I'd have to do any kind of talk in front of somebody, my heart would start to pound. Like literally with each passing minute prior to the actual moment that I had to go and even ask a question, in a class, let alone speak publicly, my heart would almost come out of my chest. And that reaction made I was terrified. I, was crippled. I would get tongue tied in my expression. So I wasn't embodied in the present moment. I was carried back to a near death experience that I had no knowledge of consciously in my prefrontal cortex, right? My body knew it. And the fact that I was going on stage for me personally was very much like when I came out of the womb and how I was received in that hospital room and how much of a shock it was to my system because there was a lot of people and there, were a lot of lights and it wasn't anything like my divine experience in where I came from, from the cosmos, right? And it was cold and um there was no softness there. And there was something big that happened between my parents in that moment that my mom like got really triggered by my dad holding me. And she like completely just shut down and went away. And that disconnection from her, because I was so aware, most babies are so aware, I was heartbroken. And that one instance is with me for the rest of my life. But the more work that I did and I discovered, oh my God, that there was a cord and that there were things that happened. Um, and I would repeat this experience, like recapitulate this experience unknown. And the more therapy I did around it and I became aware of my story, I was able to become more present. So like with you now, I'm not so worried about the birth. Like I know what this is and I can settle myself and I'm comfortable speaking publicly now. I've gone through the gauntlet, if you will, and I've done the work to become more present body so that the past doesn't hijack what's going on. And a lot of people who have anxiety. This is like I was telling you about, this was an experience of my past, but a lot of people have past experiences that were so overwhelming, they never resolved them. And so they're constantly freaking out about the future. And that's what anxiety is. It's like worrying about what's ahead. What do you have to do to prepare yourself? and they can't settle in their body because they have fear. And they may not even be aware that they have fear. It's just like kind of their baseline operational mode. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I guess at the core, embodiment is harmonic resonance, both with your internal landscape and external world. And when you have full access to the trinity of your body, your emotions, and your spirit, right? You can allow all these three aspects to exist in dynamic interaction, readily accessible and interconnected. And this is like I know this story about myself, and I can hold that consciously and hold that little one that's still inside of me, and be tender there. If that makes sense? Um, yeah. And I guess there's so much more to this question.
Mm.
Is Were you on a sleep schedule, by the way, when you were raised?
I was not
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that.
sick baby. So
Okay, you were a very sick baby.
yeah, I had hemangiomas or birthmarks in my throat that were obstructing my airway.
Mm-hmm.
So I would need to go to the hospital with my mom at different times, and um, she was actually really attuned to me, and um, just she wouldn't put me down at specific times or anything. It was just whenever I was tired, I would sleep, but there was that complication of what was going on with my health at the time.
Right. And it's interesting that you and I have talked a little bit about this. And you called me up one night and you said, I think I'm having a birth imprint or something's activating something about my birth. I don't even know what it is, but can I come? Can we have a session? Right. And, I had no idea what was going to show up in the session. And then all of a sudden, we're kind of going through this. And I'd known a little bit about your birth. I knew that your mom had a lot of morning sickness, right? And it wasn't even morning sickness. She was just sick the whole time. Yes.
Oh,
Yes. And that was highly stressful for her. I mean, to be nauseous and sick and pregnant for 9 months is insane. I don't wish that on any human being. So not only did she go through that, but then when you're born, she has the stress of this, constantly like crying, and even you turned blue at one point and she had to like rush you off to the hospital. So that constant fear or just tension in the field is like you're feeding off of each other. And it was really hard something was obviously wrong. Something was wrong. But they had addressed all the physical things, right? I mean, they made sure that they tested your blood, they did all these things and they couldn't find anything, right? And what did we discover in this session that was just wild?
wow, we had discovered that there is likely a twin that came in with me, and
Yes.
um that was really impacting me and my mom at the time, and especially since the twin didn't make it.
Yes. And your mom had no idea. And I may even asked her when I met her if she had any bleeding at the beginning of her pregnancy. And I often ask this to women, people don't realize that most babies come as twins, even triplets, or there's more. It takes a couple of souls to cross over, like a bardo, if you will, like a friend, a soulmate, or even really your higher self can be what you're disconnected from in order to come in and to condense Like, I think, like, somebody, you could imagine an hourglass, right? And then, like, what little makes it through from, like, who you are, this wide, expansive consciousness, and how you have to go through this, like, narrow tube, if you will, or wormhole. What do you leave behind, right? And so there's a great mystery around birth, like even how it all happens. But you immediately felt when this, again, I like, is like a voice almost in the session. So the field started to talk with us as we settled in. And I was like, let me just share this and see how it sounds. Like, what is this? How do you react to this? And I depicted the possibility of there being a person that you lost. And not only that you lost, but that you kind of digested into into your cellular body, right? Because you had this crazy birth imprint or birthmark on your head, and you mentioned these things in your throat, right? Yeah, and you immediately, it just, well, maybe you can tell me what that was like for you when those words were spoken out loud.
And I started feeling on my body where that impact or that imprint is. And I just started noticing those sensations. And yeah, it was just kind of like it felt like puzzle pieces finding their way into um like where there had been missing pieces. It didn't feel like that from what we had, gathered in the session. It was things were starting to become more clear.
And you, I mean, at one point too, I even had tears in my eyes because there was just this immense tragic sadness.
A lot of emotion.
Yeah, it just like a heavy blanket just came. It was like we opened a doorway for all that to release. And I'm sure it brought up more questions for you.
It did.
But at the same time, did you so it's like all of this nobody even attuned to at your birth, but you also went through another gauntlet through the birth canal itself, which was very reminiscent, if you will, of coming into your egg cell, right? Like being your soul condensing into an actual cellular body. That same experience, you see, gets reactivated in your birth. So here you are, like fresh out the other side, and you're suffering from s- the fact that you're the survivor
Mm,
and that you've left this being left you,
mm,
right? And you're like literally flailing, and your heart is broken on many levels. So how do you soothe a baby at that stage? Like, who talks about this kind of stuff, right?
mm,
If only anybody had said to you, like, we actually have therapy that we do with babies. One of the ladies that you've recorded with me in session. We have done twin loss with her baby, and it's fascinating to watch because they know immediately, and they just start showing you with the baby dolls, that we have in the session. And they just start stroking the baby or like kissing the baby and just are lying down with the baby. And us just speaking out loud, like, oh my gosh, who did you lose? Is all it takes. It's like shining a light, into that darkness, and they settle. And then I'll
mm,
have a mom call me and be like, we don't have that sleep issue anymore or that constant crying. Like, I can't believe it. It's so bizarre. And then we give them exercises to do at home to kind of, again, recapitulate that story in a very positive, loving, held way where the parents are conscious of what's going on. And when that happens, it is so empowering for everybody in the family, and that baby settles. So, yeah, that's a little bit more about embodiment. We have to like understand that to get here into our bodies is a crazy journey. It's like a hero's journey that has multiple, like you've heard the myth of the 12 labors of Hercules, right? Well, that's all that whole myth is what we do in our prenatal life. And if we kind of like understand that and bring that out into the family field, it's like, wow, like we can be really supportive of our babies really early on. So there's that.
Such an important conversation, and having the permission to really share about our birth.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just it's neat. I really think it's needed. And
Yeah.
so thank you for sharing your story and inviting me to share mine. And so tell me more about how reconnecting with the body influences our emotional and spiritual well-being.
Okay. Well, so it's, well, at easy surface level stuff, it's like coming home, right? It just brings a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you develop the capacity to flow with it. And when you're embodied, you don't resist the natural rhythms of life, which a lot of people don't even know what those are. Like there's a primal pulse that we deal with every day, and that is expansion and contraction. And we wake up in the morning and we're meant to be in our sympathetic nervous system, right? And be curious and gung ho about the day. And we have lots of things to do, and we can get them done. But we have these natural lulls in that expansion where we're meant to contract, exhale, if you will. But a lot of us override that because of shaming or whatever conditioning. Like that rhythm isn't upheld at all by our society. I mean, we don't even have a day that everything just closes down. Like we don't have that anymore. And I don't know if the flower of life. There's a video that we have on our website on our about page, and it literally shows how we are just like the flower of life and the famous story of creation. There's lots of creation stories, but the 7 days that God made the world is one of them, and the flower of life mimics that. Like literally, the seventh flower petal, or like the sixth flower petal, while after it's completed, there's a return to the center of the flower, and that is the rest. That is the integration. And that integration we often override, even in our birth. Like nowadays, there's a huge movement to um, allow babies to have the golden hour after they're born. But the norm is that you get your umbilical cord cut like within the first minute of birth, and you get scrubbed up. Like they take all the vernix off the child, and which is like hugely important for their immune system and for their balancing after the birth. Like they need to integrate themselves into this world out of the womb. They literally just died to their womb life, and they've been born again, breathing air on their own. And we rob that from them. We cut the cord, we bathe them. Oftentimes we stick stuff in their eyes. We weigh them, we measure their head, we shuffle them all around. A lot of babies don't even get to be right with their mother. Now, some of this is changing, but for the most part, where's the integration? Like, where's that hour of just doing nothing? Like the woman just went through the most magnificent, amazing experience, threshold crossing of her life. And she should have to do nothing. And the
Amen.
baby should have to do nothing, but we don't even do that. So like this natural, that's just one example of how we are disconnected from our actual nature. And this is something that you and I, kind of going back a little bit to what you and I do together with metaphysics, because people are like, well, what is that? Meta, meaning like the middle, right? Physics, like the laws of physics. So metaphysics is when you study um these spiritual forces or energetic forces, right? That form this physical existence. And very few people actually have a relationship with the natural elements. And you and I spend a lot of time working with elements. What does that mean? Um, Elements. Can you name the four, Ovi?
Water, earth, air, and fire.
Okay. And did you know? You probably do, but for those listening, did you know that there's 4 levels of existence for each element?
No.
Yeah. So there's the actual physical, like let's just take fire, for instance. Okay. There's a physical element of fire, like you light a candle and there's a flame, right? Then emotionally, fire exists in the emotional realm, and fire exists in the mental realm, and fire exists in the spiritual realm. And it actually condenses in frequency. So you have spirit at the top, mental, emotional, physical. And a lot of people don't even know, like, for instance, what is fire in the physical? A lot of people could probably describe, like, what is fire when you light a candle? What is it to you?
It is very hot.
Yes. Okay, so it gives warmth, right? Heat.
Mm.
And what happens if it gets out of control, or what does it do?
That's
Yep,
pretty.
it spreads. And with all that heat, what else does it do?
It destroys.
It
Great.
destroys. That's one way of saying it. It transforms matter, right? Like it burns it up and leaves like ash behind. Yeah. So physically, we use fire to cook things, like our heat to purify things,
Mm.
or like you said, destroy, like burn it away so something new can come in. And we see that in nature, like forest fires actually spark the seed life in the soil. Like some seeds actually need, in order to germinate, they need fire. So there's that. But so if we go now one step up into the emotional plane, if you will, fire is what? Like, what does fire represent in the emotional plane? Do you know?
Will.
Okay. And that's hard to talk about. Like, what is your will? But you can see that there's a relation, right? Your will is like in the Indian tradition, like the solar plexus is represented by the sun or fire, and it represents passion, like the things that you get really passionate about. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you used a word earlier, fire in this mental plane is really about initiation or the spark of creation, right? Like a thought. You get inspired to do something. That is technically the fire element. And then on the spiritual plane, fire itself in most ancient traditions you see is like um literally the life force. What we call that divine spark, right? We use the word spark, and that is a fire. So by engaging with the different types of elements and like what their characteristics are within each plane brings us an expanded awareness or more consciousness. And now we can weave those elements into manifesting something. I use elements all the time in my therapy work, like especially for visualization, for people to get a sense of like to create change in their body. Like when I'm holding somebody's sacrum, for instance, and a mother has just, all of a sudden her birth is reignited and her sacrum is on fire. It is totally like this ring of fire that babies go through in order to be born. Well, what can you do to douse fire?
Use some water.
Water. Yeah. I mean, and so it's like allowing a person to visualize pouring water into their body is a way that they can consciously, with their mind, control what's happening in their body. And people are like, what? And the women that I work with, when we do, I call this a womb cleansing, right? Or a sacrum cleansing. But oftentimes, like women's sacrums, there's so much emotion that's carried in our pelvis, which is again another like our water storehouse. Um, that their sacrums are very angry. There's a lot of fire there. And when a baby has to cross over that threshold, it hurts. There's a lot of emotions there that have been packed in and repressed if a mom hasn't done some kind of deeper work on herself, right? Especially like her own story or her own birth. And that baby has to pass through that portal, and there's all kinds of memory there. And that memory gets activated, and it's like going through the fires of hell, right? And it hurts. And so babies will tell me their story, like what it was passing through their mom's pelvis. And when I'm holding a mom's sacrum and the baby is there and there's like all this crying and angst and just so much turmoil, and the mom is like using this visualization in the present moment to like cool her body down and release this pent up energy, all of a sudden something magical happens. Like not only does their body release a ton of heat, but they lighten the load that they carry, and the baby gets this sense of peace. Like that goes back to your question, like what's the benefit of all this, right? Well, it's to be lighter, it's to be liberated from these dramas, right, of human existence. And yeah, and we dance. We dance with these elements within a session because we're made of all these elements, and we can direct them with our mind and really um, use our will, if you will, use our core, who we are and what we want in the world, like our own unique expression, like our wave, right? We can use that to direct our experiences, which is empowering. And then all of a sudden people are like, my gosh, I feel so amazing and I accomplished something and that feels good.
Mm.
So yeah, that's one reason why we want to reconnect with our bodies and nature, right? How we are nature. So hopefully that answers your question.
And you talk about how experiences from the womb and infancy shape us. Can you explain how that happens?
Yeah, like experiences from the womb, which are our earliest experiences before we even take our first breath, right? It sets the foundation for how we relate to the world, to ourselves. There's a famous quote by David Chamberlain, who was a doctor, an OBGYN, who studied a lot about birth. And he explains like the womb is a classroom and
Mm.
every human attends this classroom, right? So what does that mean? And I'll give you an example. of implantation. People are like, what? What is that? Implantation is when a fertilized egg makes its first contact with the mother's womb. Okay. So imagine this tiny being, right? Which is just a zygote at this point, like usually. It's a sperm and an egg cell floating down the fallopian tube, making its way to the stage, right, of the womb where it's going to make its home and grow for the next 9 months, right? Well, this stage, if you will, it's a cauldron, the womb. And remember, it's in the element or of water because the human body, the pelvis, the hips is connected with the element of water in ancient traditions. And this space carries memory, right? I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Frozen.
Yes.
Okay. And Olaf is like talking about how water carries memory. And, Elsa goes and she tries to, she uncovers this story about her grandfather, right? Well, that's exactly what happens to a zygote. It's going into this charged area of memory. Now, what is in there, right? What is waiting in this cauldron? In that cauldron is a soup of all the ingredients that's going to go and make this being's flesh, all right? Its actual physical body. And what if this, how do you say this? Like, let's imagine a uterine lining that is ideally soft, plush, it's full of blood. The mom has this really welcoming continence. She wants to get pregnant. She's been consciously planning for a birth. She had a pretty good childhood. She had a pretty good birth, right? She hasn't had any miscarriages. And she has a partner who loves her, so she's in this flow, right? That's an ideal state. And this baby, this soul can feel this state of blissful receptivity, right? And this woman who's carrying this kind of information in her body is very balanced in her hormones. She has a lot of oxytocin, the love hormone, right? She produces serotonin. She has regulated endorphins. And so she has a very fertile, receptive space. Now, this is like the most ideal. And this is also reflected in the cosmos. We call it the Milky Way. Literally, there's like in certain parts of the globe, not where I live, like you can look outside and you can see this dusting, right? Or this arm of our galaxy, and it's called the Milky Way. And it's this flow, this river of what we call the milk, right? So when this mother has that kind of balance in her body, she produces this milk inside of her uterus that literally warms and hugs this egg cell, right? So the soul that's in this zygote is able to burrow in and create a really beautiful home. All right. So what if this environment is not so thriving? And you see this a lot now. Women have very major issues with fertility. They take a lot of drugs, in some cases, a lot of steroids in order to produce eggs. And it's incredibly stressful. Or let's say a woman who's gone and she's got endometriosis, right? And she's got to get her uterus scraped. And we've got a woman who doesn't have, she did not have a very secure attached childhood. And she carried a lot of fear in her body. Or somebody who's lived through war, Ukraine, or wherever, there's so many areas in the world that, or let's say a woman who grew up in poverty and, she has a lot of scarcity imprints. So what is this soul first taste, first contact with its mother? That information right there will filter its entire being. Every cell that divides from that egg cell, that fertilized egg, is going to carry this information. How does that being now perceive the world? Right?
Mm. And you're speaking epigenetics.
Yes. Because epi meaning like above, right? Or around. That's exactly it. Like, what is the environment that this, the genes are in? And the genes, the DNA, there's DNA is not flawed. Like, it has an incredible capacity to be an antenna, like a tuning fork, if you will. And it picks up information, not only from here, but from across the universe. Like, it's quantum, right? It has the ability to pick up information about its environment and then direct however proteins are made, or how the DNA gets methylated. So the story that a person carries, this is how we know. And this is even a biblical reference, the sins of your fathers, like, will carry 3 generations. And we've now proven this, with mice testing, that people who lived, let's say, in the potato famine in Ireland, 3 generations down, those people are going to live in their bodies as if they're starving. Did you know this is kind of like why diabetes is a thing? Because diabetes is about insulin resistance, right? Being able for a cell to receive nourishment. And diabetes is all about, that is an epigenetic phenomenon, for instance. I mean, you can name any common disease and say, oh, that's a family trait. Oh, that's in our family lineage. Well, because it came from somewhere. It started as a story of trauma that hasn't been overcome. And it keeps getting passed down from generation to generation, which is why our generation now, like us today in 2025, we have to do so much freaking work on ourselves. Because we're giving all these people who didn't have time to do therapy because they're just like in survival mode, right? Yeah, but that's a classic example of how your womb life literally shapes who you are and conditions you, right? Conditions you for the life that it thinks you're going to live.
Mm. So fascinating.
It is. And it's like a lot of people, when they hear the first time, I'm like, did you know that your egg cell that you came from Ovi, right, was a fully developed egg cell with all the DNA that it carried, right? Methylated and everything. It was fully formed when your mother was 5 months gestation in her mother's womb. So your DNA was imprinted based on your grandmother's life. And of course, the egg cells that she had were, come from her grandmother.
Right.
So it's this hierarchical effect, this building upon.
Right. Mm. Are there any scientific or psychological insights that help us understand the significance of these formative moments?
You mean like proof that this is like not some wacky tale?
For our listeners, additional
Yeah. And that's so, it's so great. Like, the classes that we have are very based and steeped in science. And we have a lot of film, like recordings of people going through these sessions and having these memories that they're tapping into. So there's decades of psychosomatic birth regression research, right? That's been compiled by psychologists, birth workers, midwives, doulas, therapists, body workers, whatever. So you have that whole library of information. And of course, now you have modern science and psychology that are they're catching up the publications that are out there now, and a lot of the trials that have been done and have been written about and published, scientific journals are are verifying essentially what ancient wisdom traditions have known all along, that our womb life shapes our nervous system, our emotional patterns, and really our perception of reality. But um, scientific perspective, fields like prenatal psychology, tons of information about this. Epigenetics that you mentioned, Bruce Lipton's, all of his research with how the cell works and the membrane, how that's really the coding the brain of the cell. It's not the DNA, but it's the cell membrane that's, scanning the field or scanning its environment. So we have that. We have Dr. Thomas Verney's whole body of work. If anybody's interested in reading some books that he's published, that's a lot of his research in clinical settings. And now we know through testing of cortisol, right? And I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Rachel Yehuda, but she's in New York, and she did a lot with Holocaust survivors generations and a lot of blood testing there. And um, so we now understand, like, also a mother who's highly stressed and produces a lot of cortisol in her body, how that affects her baby's brain, how the baby usually is born with a lower IQ, um, underweight, or has a lot, there's a lot of Black people, for instance, we now know that even if they come from a really great family environment, they often have premature babies, and they have more comorbidities during pregnancy than a white woman. And that is, the slave trade and discrimination, like racism, what their body had to um, fight against or endure, and how that's now passing on to their generation. So there's a lot of stuff out there now that you can research that really proves how the womb life truly affects you. Hopefully that answers your question.
And then some.
Yeah.
And so let's see. Can you explain how the body stores memory and why some experiences become so deeply imprinted?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting that trauma is more has more profound effects on the body than experience of joy.
Mm.
And it's literally the science of what happens when your body has a huge adrenaline spike. And I don't know, have you ever heard of this saying about the neurons, like when they fire together, they wire together? Okay. Well, at birth, a baby's brain is like this huge, like all the neurons have been formed, but they haven't been wired together. So it's like this sea, of billions of brain cells that when it goes through the birth, which is highly stressful, and there's a lot of adrenaline, right? A lot of cortisol, those neurons get activated. So whatever their birth experience is like really ingrains in deeply roots into their nervous system, which is why it is so important for women to, one, have a pregnancy with very little stress, right? So they're producing more and more oxytocin, and that their birth is incredibly supportive. And that afterwards, ideally, that the birth story itself is integrated, like it's processed with the baby. That ideally that baby gets some sort of craniosacral therapy, and the mother, and an integrative sharing or a narrative with somebody who can consciously attune to all the different areas that they had to navigate during the stages of birth, so that they they have kind of like a clean slate, like, that they can thrive from.
Mm.
But yeah, it's the also, we have to get rid of this preconceived notion that memory is stored in the brain. It
Mm.
just isn't. Science has proven that, that memory is not a local, like a localized factor. It's quantum,
Mm.
and it's this field of information, right? That is infiltrates every cell of the body. So it's not the brain, but it's the membrane of the cell, right? So the body stores memory, not the brain. Although the brain and the hippocampus, like we know, is a huge part of how to process, because our body is sending, remember how I said our gut and our heart is sending more information to our brain than the other way around? And that hippocampus is processing the information that the body's sending so that we can perceive, like that we can have our reality, if you will. So we have to understand that um, when somebody has a strong emotional or even physical reaction to something, um, it's important for you to understand that this is an imprint that's stored in the tissues. Like what we say, the issues are in the tissues. And you have to have um, a process. You have to kind of unfold a process with people. That's why we call our workshops, somatic process for it to unfold. And I have this, I deal with this all the time. People know so little about IVF, even though we've been doing IVF since the 70s. It's still a very young industry, right?
Mm.
But IVF babies, I work with them all the time. And they show me that even before their embryo was implanted in the surrogate mother or the mother itself, right? It's already responding to its environment, seeking connection and a place to root. So what does that mean? Like, I work with, for instance, individuals. I went to a class. One of my cranial classes was one of the guys that I was doing table work. He had two, you know, he had two moms, and one of the moms, like, you know, collected her eggs, and they went through IVF, right? But they froze the eggs. And he had this like deep unsettling, like he suffered from severe anxiety, which is why he was so attracted to cranial sacral therapy school. And when we would get like on the table, and we were like right before you're like drop into the parasympathetic state, like this holistic place where the body's rested and, you're still on the table, he would set off the fire alarm, like with the energy in his body. The fire alarm would go off. And then the first couple times it happened, we thought it was like some weird, like something was malfunctioning with the fire alarm, right? And of course, the fire department came, and like, it's like, this is up in Massachusetts and it's February and it's freaking cold outside. And everybody's like outside waiting for the fire department to clear the building. And then we go back in, and everybody gets settled and get on the table, and boom, sure enough, this kid like gets on the table, and like 5 minutes in, he's like, boom, the fire alarm goes off again. And our teacher realized, oh my gosh, because she had done very comprehensive intakes on all the students, that this kid was an IVF baby and that he had been, a frozen egg. So this freezing of his body, he would recapitulate it in his energy field. Like the fire alarm, sends out this like charge, right? And it was, he couldn't settle. he couldn't go into that settled place because it would remind him of being frozen. Stillness was a near death experience. Now, how do you overcome that, right? So you have to titrate, and we deal with this all the time, like with IVF babies. People have no concept that an egg cell is a conscious, actually, it's a conscious entity, right? And it's a portal. It's a sacred gateway. And when you're dealing with IVF, you're dealing with test tubes and sterile environments that are very cold and, there's just no warmth or life. And you're injecting a needle half the time, into, if you're doing like an ICSI, for instance, and you're centrifuging the eggs and then you take a needle and you stab it, right? I've even had sessions with babies where I can feel their body where they were stabbed with the needle. And it's like being, um, what's the word? When you impaled.
Mm.
And it's incredibly painful. And this is like their first experience of life, right? Is this crazy environment where there's no connection and there's no heart field, the mother's heartbeat. So a lot of times with IVF babies, we have to do heart entrainment. We have to do coherence with the mother and getting the mother's heartbeat and working with frequency. I do a lot with sound, sound healing with babies who've gone through IVF so that they can settle in their bodies and release this really like tragic memory that they have that is pretty horrific, actually. So I know that's like a crazy topic to bring up, but it's so real. And understanding that memory is stored in the body, right? And that it's rippling literally through layers of consciousness. So we have to really honor the spaces of how we make babies. First of all, like what level of consciousness we are when we're bringing beings into the world.
So many layers.
There really is. And I know that's like we've unpacked a lot, and I know we're kind of hopefully winding down because we're getting on that hour, mark. But yeah.
So, if experiences are not set in stone and they are stored in this ever present quantum field that you spoke about, what are some practices or approaches that can help people access deeper transformation and self awareness?
Yeah, well, I mean, what can so you're asking me like what can they do, right? Like how can they
How can
Mm,
they, yeah, how can they use this as a way to go into themselves and
yes, okay. Well, easy easy way to do that is to have an actual birth regression session.
okay.
Be curious and find a practitioner or reach out to us and inquire like how do I learn more about my birth? I was adopted. I knew nothing about my birth, or my mom won't talk about my birth. It's like a thing that we've never really discussed. It doesn't matter. Like we get in and it's a series of questions, kind of like an exploration and noticing felt sense, like what's happening in your body. And then all of a sudden the terrain just it comes right out into the field, right? Like I said, like during your session, it's almost like there's somebody talking to me or Catherine, right? So in a safe guided space, you can awaken the memory of your birth and then explore what emotions come up, right? And then go through this process of being in a held space where somebody's actually consciously attuned to you. And sometimes that's not so easy. Sometimes you can't start with a birth regression. Sometimes, and this is why intake is important. um, an intention, right? Maybe you just need some craniosacral therapy, or maybe you need some somatic experiencing. That's a modality that's really great for working with people to create environments of safety that they can experience, because some people have never even felt safe. And they've got this mask on and they're like pretending to everybody in the world that like everything's hunky dory, but deep down inside, they're like a total mess. Right. And so that we have to get you feeling this presence of embodiment, like dipping your toe in. So there's that. It's always dependent upon who you are, where you've come from, right? What it is that you're seeking. But for sure, a birth regression session is definitely a key element of what we do, even though we have a list of practices that we can try, even just breathing, with you consciously. So
Great. And do you want to share an example of a healing or embodiment practice that someone could try now or today?
oh yeah, sure. Well, like, why don't you and I do this together?
Okay.
So just kind of get yourself situated. And what I want to do is like 3 points of contact. Um, and let me just explain what we're doing. Whoever's listening can easily do this with somebody, that they know, um, and just try it out. But what it is the idea is that we want to like shift something. We want to shift the being of ourselves, into a more coherent state, right? And, you and I have been taught, like it's more didactic, right? Like, so we've been sitting here for a while now in our chairs and like absorbing a lot of information. So how are you feeling in your body right now? Do you notice any areas of discomfort or maybe just fatigue?
Yes, I do. I notice some in my legs,
Okay.
some fatigue or just tightness in my hips and in my legs.
Okay. Hips and legs. All right. So we're going to revisit that at the end of this exercise. And what I'd like you to do right now is just, I'm going to name in myself. Oh, like I feel really hot on this side of my head. And it's because I've been speaking and carrying on for some time right now. And I told you about my imprint, even though my neck coloration has gone down a little bit, still feel the heat.
Mm.
Um, and I'm going to just name a place that my body is coming in contact with. And then you're going to do the same. And we do it 3 times. So 3 revolutions. You ready? Okay. Oh, well, I noticed an exhale. That's not really a point of contact, but I could feel the oxygen leaving my lungs and my ribs kind of settling a little just now. What do you notice your body coming in contact with?
You were saying that I noticed kind of like a wave move through my chest and up my neck, my throat, and into my head and then out. And it was like a wave, but it included an inhale and an exhale.
And I noticed my low back just making contact with the chair.
More yawning, letting it out of my belly and my chest.
Okay. Oh, I noticed my elbows like sitting on the arm of the chair.
Yeah, I noticed my body, just my belly slowly just really resting into like resting into the back of the, well, it's not the back of the chair, but like the back of my belly, my back, my lower back. Just like resting and relaxing more into the chair.
Okay. And that's 3 rounds. It's just a short little. But now that you've done these 3 rounds, like, what do you notice about your legs and your hips? How are they still the same, or what do you notice that's different from when we first started?
Yeah, there's a lot more space, a lot more
Mm.
spaciousness. So less
Space.
like tightness, I would say there's more of like openness in my legs.
Yeah.
There's also some heat.
Some heat. And is heat something that you associated with something negative or something positive? Tell me more about heat.
Yeah, I don't know that it has a negative or positive right now in this moment.
So you're okay with it.
I'm really okay with it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. So just that right there, we shifted a little bit. You were able to get a little bit more spaciousness. That's, our consciously attuning together in connection with
Mm,
each other. And I feel like it's a little, slower,
me
slower
too.
in my body.
Yeah, it's all like we were co-regulating. And I don't know if you
That's
want
exactly what we were doing.
to define what co-regulating is to our listeners.
Well, that's the whole point of harmonic resonance, right? When you're in this like space together and you're connecting in some way. In this way, we were just noticing where our bodies were touching things. And that act alone was us coming into regulation with each other and thereby creating kind of a more coherent field. Since you're not over there as your own little waveform and I'm over here as mine, but now all of a sudden we've built a bridge,
Mhm.
right? So that's a lot about what we do. We build
Mm,
bridges, whether it's bridges to the mind, the body, or, the spiritual planes. That's what
yeah.
we're
And what's one takeaway that you hope listeners will reflect on after this episode?
doing. If there's one thing I hope listeners take away from this conversation is that you are not bound by your past.
Mm,
The imprints you carry, whether they're from the womb, early childhood, or inherited generational patterns, right? They're not your destiny. They can be, but they are simply starting points, the point to unfold, right? And the body holds memory, but it also holds the power to transform. And the same way an old imprint can shape your reality, a new awareness can rewrite it in the present moment. That's only time healing happens is right now in the present moment, not in the past and not in the future. So the moment you recognize that your beliefs, your patterns, your emotional responses are not fixed, you're opening a door to radical self improvement and healing. And yeah, so this is where I would invite you to ask yourself, those listening, what stories have been unconsciously living inside of you? And what new story do you want to embody? Right. And when you start seeing yourself as this conscious creator of your experience, everything is where we begin to bring in change.
mm. Definitely want to delve into that with you in the future.
Yes.
Are there per episode.
Yeah.
The creator of your reality, not just creator. So what can listeners expect in the next episode? And how can they engage with the Woven in the Body community?
Okay, well, the next episode that we're doing, we're diving deep into the consciousness of birth. And that it's like we're exploring how the birth itself acts as a portal of awakening. And we'll unpack the sacred nature of birth and how it serves as this entry point to higher states of awareness, not only for the child being born, but for the parents or the caregivers. Um, Birth is a transformative experience. And we're going to go through the stages of birth. Like, what are the psychological impacts that happen, when birth is initiated, right? And then when the baby turns around the sacrum or when the baby goes through the pelvic outlet, there's all kinds of psychological material uh, that a person, the soul, has to cross through, right? This is kind of like the 12 levers of Hercules. We're going to really map this birth terrain and a lot of common beliefs or things that you see in life. Like, we're going to relate it to your birth. And people are going to be like, what? That is so crazy. So there's a lot of practical insights, um, that highlight the spiritual significance and the psychological significance that your birth has had. So that will be pretty cool. And we're going to do that with Catherine, who's, an expert and has done decades of group therapy and somatic processes and has seen all kinds of birth regression sessions and, sharing what it is that we do, with babies and parents and even if you're not a baby, right? Like, how we can unpack your birth story and open opportunities for healing.
Thing.
Cool. Yeah. Lots to come, lots to unpack. So we're really, I'm just grateful that we held this space and we've got through our first podcast and there's so much more to talk. There's so much more to talk about, like this evolving consciousness around birth and the journey of embodiment. So we hope you visit us again and enjoy or share the Woven podcast you heard today.
Thank you for joining us.